The alarm screamed through the bridge of the TCS horizon as Commander Jake Morrison rushed to his command chair. Red lights flashed across every screen, and the communications officer was already trying to make sense of the chaos coming through. The speakers. "Commander, we're getting a distress signal from New Eden Colony," said Lieutenant Amy Chen, her fingers flying over the controls. "The signal is weak and breaking up, but it sounds bad." Jake felt his stomach drop. New Eden was one of humanity's newest colonies, home to 17,000 people. Farmers, teachers, children, and elderly folks who had traveled across the stars looking for a peaceful life. They had no military defenses, no weapons stronger than hunting rifles. "How long to reach New Eden?" Jake asked. 4 hours at maximum speed," replied the navigator. "Do it. Send word to command that we're responding to an emergency." The next 4 hours felt like forever. Jake paced the bridge while his crew worked in tense silence. They all knew New Eden was too far from Earth to get help quickly. The horizon was a small exploration ship with basic weapons, but they were the only hope the colonists had. When they finally dropped out of hyperspace near New Eden, Jake's heart stopped. The planet that should have been green and blue was covered in smoke and fire. Huge craters marked where cities used to be. The orbital farms were nothing but burning metal floating in space. "My God," whispered Dr. Lisa Parker, the ship's security chief. She was staring at her scanner readings with wide eyes. "There's nothing left. The entire planet has been bombed." Jake ordered the ship closer. As they moved through the debris field, they could see pieces of homes, schools, and hospitals scattered among the stars. Everything that had made New Eden a home for 17,000 people was gone. "Are there any survivors?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. "No life signs," Amy reported, her voice barely a whisper. "Nothing at all." Lisa was studying the weapon signatures left behind by the attack. Her face grew pale as she worked. "Commander, you need to see this. The weapons that did this, they're not human. The energy patterns match something in our database." She put the data on the main screen. The signatures were unlike anything Earth's military used. The weapons were more advanced, more powerful, and designed to destroy everything they touched. "Zephyrians," Lisa said. "These are Zephyrian plasma cannons, military-grade, ship-mounted. They didn't just attack New Eden, they erased it." Jake had heard of the Zephyrians. They controlled a huge empire on the other side of the galaxy. 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor and known for conquering weaker species. But they had never come this far into human space before. "Why would they attack New Eden?" Amy asked. "It was just a farming colony. No military bases, no weapons factories. Just families trying to build a new life." Before anyone could answer, the communication system crackled to life. A deep, harsh voice filled the bridge, speaking in broken English. "Weak humans. You have seen the price of defying the Zephyrian Empire. Your pathetic colony has been removed as a warning. You have 7 of your days to leave all worlds beyond your home system. If you do not obey, all human colonies will share the same fate." The message repeated 3 times, then cut off. The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of the ship's engines. Jake stared at the ruins of New Eden floating outside his window. 17,000 innocent people had died to deliver a message. Children who would never grow up. Parents who would never see another sunrise. All because some alien empire had decided humanity was in their way. "Set course for Earth," Jake ordered. "Maximum speed. Command needs to hear about this immediately." The trip back to Earth took 2 days. Jake spent the time writing his report and trying to process what he had seen. The Zephyrians had not just attacked a military target. They had murdered civilians to make a point. That told him everything he needed to know about what kind of enemy humanity was facing. When they reached Earth, Jake was immediately called to meet with Admiral Henry Clark, the head of the Terran Defense Fleet. Clark was a tough old soldier who had been in the military for 40 years. He listened to Jake's report without interruption, his face growing darker with each detail. 17,000 dead, Clark said when Jake finished. "And they want us to abandon all our colonies, or face the same fate. Yes, sir, they gave us 7 days. Clark stood up and walked to the window of his office, looking out at the ships of Earth's defense fleet. There were maybe 200 vessels total, from small patrol boats to massive battleships. It was a respectable force for defending Earth, but nothing compared to what the Zephyrians could bring to bear. "Have you ever heard of the Zephyrian Empire, Commander?" Clark asked. "Only basic information, sir. They control a lot of territory and have a reputation for being aggressive. They control over 200 star systems. Their military is estimated at over 50,000 warships. They have been conquering other species for thousands of years. No one has ever successfully resisted them." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "So what do we do?" "We call an emergency session of the Colonial Council. This decision is too big for the military alone." 2 hours later, representatives from all 17 human colonies were gathered in the council chamber via hologram. President Maria Santos, a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes, stood at the center of the room as Admiral Clark presented the situation. "The Zephyrians have given us 7 days to evacuate all colonies beyond Earth," she said when Clark finished. "They have made it clear that refusal means war, a war we cannot win through traditional military means." "How many ships do they have?" asked the representative from Alpha Centauri. "Conservative estimates put their fleet at 50,000 vessels. We have fewer than 300. The room erupted in worried voices. Some representatives called for immediate evacuation. Others demanded they fight regardless of the odds. The debate went on for hours. Finally, President Santos called for quiet. "I understand the fear. I understand the anger. But we need to make a decision. Do we abandon everything we have built among the stars, or do we stand and fight?" The vote was closer than anyone expected. In the end, it was unanimous. Not a single colony voted to surrender. "Then it's settled," Santos said. "We reject their ultimatum. Admiral Clark, prepare the fleet." As the meeting ended, Jake found himself thinking about the families on New Eden. They had died because they were in the way of an empire that saw them as insects to be stepped on. Now humanity faced the same fate, but something told him the Zephyrians had made a mistake. They had given humanity time to prepare. More importantly, they had shown their true nature. And if there was one thing Jake knew about humans, it was that they fought differently when their backs were against the wall. The war was coming, and the Zephyrians were about to learn that some species become more dangerous when threatened, not less. The first Zephyrian ships appeared at the edge of human space exactly 7 days after their ultimatum expired. Captain Amy Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the TCS Defiance, watching her sensors as hundreds of enemy vessels dropped out of hyperspace near Kepler Station. "How many ships?" she asked her tactical officer. "Over 300, Captain, all large warships. They're moving in standard attack formation." Amy had studied every piece of information they had about Zephyrian military tactics. They always fought the same way. Line up their ships, advance slowly, and overwhelm the enemy with superior firepower. It had worked for them for thousands of years against every species they had encountered, but Amy had no intention of fighting them the way they expected. "All ships, this is Captain Rodriguez. Scatter formation. Use the asteroid field for cover. Do not engage them directly. Hit and run only." The Zephyrian commander, War Prime Kethvar, watched from his flagship as the human ships broke apart instead of forming a battle line. This was not how space battles were supposed to work. The humans should have lined up their ships and tried to match his firepower. Instead, they were hiding among the rocks like cowards. "Pitiful," he said to his officers. "These humans have no honor. They refuse to fight properly." But as his ships moved into the asteroid field, strange things began to happen. Small human ships would dart out from behind rocks, fire a few shots, then disappear again. Mining vessels that should have been fleeing instead rammed into his destroyers and exploded. Even civilian transports were rigged with bombs and used as weapons. On the Defiance, Amy watched as her unconventional tactics confused the enemy. "Their ships are too big to maneuver well in the asteroids," she told her crew. "We can hit them where they're weakest." The battle lasted for 6 hours. When it was over, the humans had lost 12 ships. The Zephyrians had lost 43. For the first time in their military history, they had taken more losses than their enemy. War Prime Kethvar was furious. How did we lose so many ships to these insects? His tactical officer looked nervous. They did not fight according to standard, doctrine, War Prime. They used the environment against us. They sacrificed civilian ships as weapons. They refused to engage in honorable combat. Then we will crush them with overwhelming force. Send word to the High Command. We need more ships. 2 weeks later, the Zephyrians launched a massive assault on Titan Base, humanity's largest military installation outside Earth. Colonel Steve Harper commanded the defense with only 5,000 soldiers against 50,000 Zephyrian ground troops supported by orbital bombardment. The aliens expected the base to fall within hours. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a siege that lasted 3 weeks. Harper's forces used every trick they could think of. They turned mining equipment into weapons. They rigged industrial machinery to explode when the aliens tried to use it. They even used the base's water recycling system to create poisonous gas that was harmless to humans, but deadly to Zephyrians. How are they doing this? Asked War Prime Kethvar as he received reports of continued resistance. We have surrounded them. We have cut off their supplies. Why do they not surrender? His intelligence officer had been studying human behavior. War Prime, I believe the humans do not think the same way we do. When we are surrounded and outnumbered, we surrender to preserve our lives. When humans are surrounded and outnumbered, they fight harder. This made no sense to the War Prime. In Zephyrian culture, surrender was logical when defeat was certain. It was the smart thing to do. But these humans seemed to become more dangerous when they had no chance of winning. At Titan Base, engineer Kate Wilson made a discovery that changed everything. She had been studying captured Zephyrian weapons and found a critical weakness in their shield technology. The shields could block any single type of energy, but they could not adapt quickly to changing frequencies. Colonel, she reported to Harper, if we modify our weapons to cycle through different energy types rapidly, we can overload their shields. How quickly can you modify our weapons? Give me 6 hours. Within a day, every human weapon at Titan Base was cycling through multiple energy frequencies. The Zephyrian shields, which had protected them for centuries, began failing. For the first time in the siege, human weapons were doing real damage. The breakthrough came when Harper's forces launched a coordinated attack using their modified weapons. The Zephyrian ground forces, who had never faced effective resistance before, panicked and retreated to their ships. War Prime Kethvar watched his forces flee from a handful of humans and felt something he had never experienced before. Doubt. How could his superior forces be defeated by these primitives? Meanwhile, Lieutenant Commander Chris Evans was running a different kind of operation. He had hacked into Zephyrian communication networks and was broadcasting human cultural content across their fleet. Music, movies, books, and art that showed humans celebrating sacrifice, persistence, and fighting against impossible odds. The effect on the Zephyrian soldiers was disturbing. They had been taught that war was a test of strength and technology. Victory went to whoever had better weapons and more ships, but human culture seemed to celebrate losing battles while winning wars. It made no sense to them. Dr. Rachel Green, a specialist in alien psychology, was studying intercepted Zephyrian communications. She discovered something important about their society. The Zephyrians had a rigid caste system where each level had specific roles. Lower castes could not make decisions without approval from higher castes. This made them powerful but inflexible. They cannot adapt when their original plan fails, she reported to Admiral Clark. Their entire military doctrine is based on overwhelming force in the first attack. When that does not work, they have no backup plan. This information spread quickly through the human forces. Every commander learned to expect the Zephyrians to repeat failed tactics rather than try something new. It made them predictable despite their superior numbers. As months passed, something strange began to happen. The human colonies that fell to Zephyrian attack did not stay conquered. Small groups of survivors would hide in forests, caves, and ruins. They would sabotage Zephyrian supply lines, rescue captured civilians, and turn captured weapons against their captors. Commander Lisa Parker, now leading resistance operations on 3 different worlds, discovered that every defeat taught the survivors something new about Zephyrian weaknesses. "We are learning faster than they can suppress us," she reported to Earth. "Every battle makes us smarter." War Prime Kethvar found himself fighting an enemy that should have been crushed months ago. His forces won most battles, but the humans never stopped fighting. Worse, they seemed to be getting better at it. Ships that should have been destroyed escaped to fight another day. Soldiers who should have surrendered instead fought until they ran out of ammunition, then used rocks and metal bars as weapons. Most disturbing of all, the humans were beginning to win battles they should have lost. Their modified weapons were becoming more effective. Their tactics were becoming more sophisticated. And their morale never seemed to break no matter how badly they were outnumbered. For the first time in Zephyrian history, their enemies were adapting faster than they could be conquered. War Prime Kethvar began to wonder if his species had finally met an enemy they could not defeat through traditional methods. The war was far from over, but the nature of the conflict was changing. The Zephyrians had expected to face another species that would surrender when confronted with superior force. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that became more dangerous with each defeat. And deep in the human colonies, resistance fighters were learning something that would soon change the course of the war. They were not just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to prove that no species had the right to dominate another through force alone. Chief Engineer Danny Foster stood in the massive shipyard orbiting Mars, watching the first of humanity's new warships take shape. 6 months of war had taught them everything they needed to know about Zephyrian technology. Now it was time to use that knowledge. "How much faster will it be?" asked Admiral Clark, studying the sleek design of the new vessel. 30% faster than their fastest ships," Danny replied. "We took their engine technology and rebuilt it from scratch. Better fuel efficiency, more power, and half the size." The ship looked nothing like the massive Zephyrian dreadnoughts. Where their ships were huge and intimidating, the human design was small and elegant. Where Zephyrian ships had heavy armor and powerful shields, human ships had speed and maneuverability. "We cannot match their firepower," Danny explained. "But we do not need to. Hit them fast, hit them hard, then run away before they can respond." Dr. Sarah Mitchell was working on an even more important project. She called it the Harmony Protocol, a way for human ships to work together like a single organism. While Zephyrian commanders had to wait for orders from higher castes, human crews could make decisions instantly. "Every ship becomes part of a larger mind," she explained to the fleet captains. "You see an opportunity, you take it. You see a threat, you warn everyone. No delays, no asking permission." The first test of the new technology came when Admiral Clark launched Operation Homecoming. Instead of trying to destroy Zephyrian fleets, the human forces focused on something the aliens never expected: rescuing civilians. Captain Julie Adams led a strike force of 12 ships to liberate the colony of Haven Prime. The Zephyrians had conquered it months earlier and were using the human survivors as slave labor. They expected any rescue attempt to focus on military targets. Instead, Julie's ships ignored the Zephyrian warships entirely. They landed in the middle of the slave camps, loaded up with as many humans as they could carry, and escaped before the enemy could react. "They are not fighting to win territory," War Prime Kethvar reported to his superiors. "They are fighting to save their people. This makes no strategic sense." But the rescues had an effect the War Prime did not understand. Every human who was saved told others about the rescue. Stories spread through the resistance networks about ships that came out of nowhere to carry people to safety. Morale among the human survivors soared. More importantly, the rescued civilians brought detailed information about Zephyrian operations. They knew which facilities were important, which commanders were in charge, and where the aliens kept their supplies. Commander Jake Morrison, now leading deep strike operations, used this intelligence to capture a Zephyrian command ship intact. The information they found changed everything. "The Zephyrian Empire is not as solid as we thought," he reported to Admiral Clark. "They have conquered dozens of species and forced them to fight for the Empire. Many of these species hate their masters." The captured data showed that the Zephyrian military was made up of only 30% actual Zephyrians. The rest were conquered species fighting because they had no choice. Some had been enslaved for hundreds of years. Jake began making contact with these enslaved species. The first to respond were the Veltar, a peaceful people who had been conquered by the Zephyrians over 300 years ago. They were forced to work as engineers and technicians maintaining the Zephyrian fleet. "We have waited centuries for someone to stand up to them," said Veltar engineer Mira when Jake made contact, "but no one ever has. Every species surrenders when they see the size of the Zephyrian fleet." "We are not surrendering," Jake told her, "and we are not just fighting for ourselves. We are fighting for everyone they have enslaved." This was a completely new concept for the enslaved species. Every previous enemy of the Zephyrians had fought only for their own survival. The idea that humans would fight to free strangers was almost impossible to believe. But when human forces began liberating Zephyrian slave camps and freeing alien workers, the truth became clear. Humans really were fighting for the freedom of all species, not just their own. The effect was immediate and devastating. Veltar engineers began sabotaging Zephyrian ships from the inside. Kree soldiers started refusing orders to attack human positions. Dozens of conquered species began rebelling against their masters. Warprime Kethvar found himself fighting not just humans, but his own empire. Ships that should have been loyal began turning against him. Facilities that should have been secure were destroyed by sabotage. Even his own officers were starting to question orders. "How can we trust anyone?" he asked his remaining loyal commanders. "The humans have turned our own people against us." The truth was worse than he realized. The Zephyrian caste system, which had made them powerful conquerors, was now working against them. Lower castes had always been told what to do without question, but when they saw humans fighting for the freedom of all species, they began to wonder why they were fighting to preserve a system that oppressed them. Captain Amy Rodriguez, now commanding a fleet of liberated ships, led a daring raid on the Zephyrian supply depot at Rigel Station, but instead of destroying it, she captured it intact and distributed the supplies to refugee camps across the galaxy. "We are not here to conquer," she broadcast to the Zephyrian forces. "We are here to free everyone you have enslaved." The broadcast was heard across the Zephyrian Empire. For the first time, conquered species heard someone offer them freedom instead of a new master. The response was overwhelming. 12 star systems declared independence from the Zephyrian Empire in a single week. The Kree Confederacy, enslaved for over 200 years, announced they were joining the Human Alliance. The Veltar began sharing their technical knowledge with human engineers, making human ships even more advanced. Dr. Paul Bennett, now serving as humanity's chief diplomat, established the first Interspecies Council. Representatives from dozens of former Zephyrian slaves met to coordinate their rebellion. "This is not about replacing one empire with another," he told the assembled delegates. "This is about making sure no species can ever again force another into slavery." The Zephyrian military, designed to fight external enemies, could not cope with simultaneous rebellions across hundreds of worlds. Commanders who had never lost a battle were suddenly losing entire star systems. Warprime Kethvar watched his empire crumble and realized that his species had made a fundamental mistake. They had assumed that humans were just another species, to be conquered. Instead, they had encountered something completely different, a species that fought not just for survival, but for principles. "They are not trying to defeat us," he reported to the Zephyrian High Command. "They are trying to change us. They want to destroy our entire way of life." The High Command ordered him to use any means necessary to stop the rebellion. Biological weapons, planet-killing bombs, anything that would crush the human spirit and force the enslaved species back into line. But it was too late. The idea of freedom, once planted, could not be destroyed by force. Every atrocity committed by the Zephyrians only strengthened the resolve of the Alliance. Every war crime only convinced more species that the Zephyrian Empire had to be stopped. Commander Lisa Parker established resistance cells on over 50 worlds. Each cell was independent, able to operate without orders from Earth. They rescued prisoners, sabotaged military installations, and spread the message that freedom was possible. The Zephyrian Empire, which had seemed invincible just months before, was falling apart. And at the center of the chaos was a small blue planet whose people had refused to surrender when surrender was the logical choice. The war was entering its final phase. But the real battle was not being fought with ships and weapons. It was being fought with ideas and principles. And in that battle, humanity was winning. Admiral Henry Clark stood on the bridge of the TCS Liberty, watching as the combined fleet of humans and liberated species approached Zephyr Prime. The Zephyrian homeworld hung before them like a dark jewel, surrounded by the largest defensive fleet ever assembled. "How many ships?" Clark asked his tactical officer. "Over 8,000, Admiral. Everything they have left." It was the final battle of a war that had lasted 2 years. The Zephyrian Empire had collapsed across most of the galaxy, but the core worlds remained under Imperial control. War Prime Kethvar had pulled back all his remaining forces to make one last stand at the heart of his empire. But Clark had not come to Zephyr Prime to fight a battle. He had come to end a war. "Open a channel to all ships, both ours and theirs," Clark ordered. On screens across both fleets, President Maria Santos appeared. She looked older than when the war had started, her hair now completely gray, but her voice was steady and strong. "People of the Zephyrian Empire," she began. "2 years ago, your leaders chose war with humanity. They believed that strength meant the right to dominate others. They thought that superior firepower could force any species to surrender." On the Zephyrian flagship, War Prime Kethvar watched the transmission with growing anger. "Turn it off," he ordered. "War Prime, the signal, is being broadcast on all frequencies. We cannot block it. Today, we stand at the edge of your homeworld not as conquerors but as liberators," Santos continued. "We offer you the same choice we have offered every world in your empire. You can choose freedom and equality, or you can continue to fight for a system that has already failed." Across the Zephyrian fleet, soldiers and officers listened to words they had never heard before. No enemy had ever offered them terms. No enemy had ever suggested they had a choice. "Your empire is gone," Santos said. 57 star systems have declared independence. Dozens of species you once enslaved now fight alongside us. Your own. People are beginning to question why they should die to preserve a system that treats them as expendable. This was true. Reports had been flooding in from across the empire. Lower caste Zephyrians were refusing orders. Middle caste officers were surrendering rather than fighting hopeless battles. Even some upper caste commanders had switched sides. "The war can end today," Santos continued. "Not with the destruction of your people, but with the transformation of your society. You can join the interspecies alliance as equals, or you can fight alone until there is nothing left of your empire but memories." War Prime Kethvar felt something he had never experienced before. Complete despair. His empire was gone. His military was falling apart. His own officers were looking at him with doubt in their eyes. "We are Zephyrians," he said to his bridge crew. "We do not surrender. We do not bow to inferior species." But even as he spoke, he could see the uncertainty on their faces. 2 years of losing battles to humans had shaken their belief in Zephyrian superiority. 2 years of watching enslaved species break free had made them question their right to rule others. Commander Lisa Parker stood beside Admiral Clark, watching the Zephyrian fleet. "What do you think they will do?" she asked. "Some will fight," Clark replied. "Some will surrender. But the empire is already finished. The question now is how many people have to die before they accept that." The answer came within hours. Ships began breaking away from the Zephyrian formation. At first it was just a few vessels, then dozens, then entire squadrons. The lower caste crews were abandoning their posts and heading for the neutral zone that had been established at the edge of the system. War Prime Kethvar watched his fleet dissolve and felt his world crumble. "Stop them," he ordered. "Fire on any ship that tries to leave." "War Prime," his tactical officer said quietly, "if we fire on our own ships, we will have even fewer allies." The truth was that Kethvar no longer had enough loyal followers to control his own fleet. The rigid caste System that had made the Zephyrians powerful had also made them brittle. When the system broke, it broke completely. Captain Julie Adams received permission to approach the Zephyrian flagship under a flag of truce. She brought with her representatives from 12 different species that had been enslaved by the Empire. "We are here to offer you terms," she told Kethvar when they met in his conference room. "Complete surrender of all military forces, dismantling of the caste system, and participation in war crimes trials for those responsible for genocide and slavery." Kethvar looked at the beings around the table. Veltar engineers who had maintained his ships, Kree soldiers who had fought his battles, species he had never considered anything more than tools. "You would have us abandon everything that makes us Zephyrian," he said. "We would have you abandon everything that makes you oppressors," replied Mira, the Veltar engineer. "Your people can still be Zephyrian, but they cannot be masters of other species." The negotiations lasted 3 days. In the end, Kethvar agreed to surrender, but only because his own officers made it clear they would remove him if he did not. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. The Zephyrian Empire broke apart into 47 independent systems. Some embraced the new order and joined the Interspecies Alliance immediately. Others struggled with the transition from imperial rule to democratic government. A few tried to maintain the old ways and found themselves isolated and irrelevant. Dr. Paul Bennett established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to deal with the crimes committed during the war. It was not about revenge, but about making sure such things never happened again. "We could execute every war criminal," he explained to the commission, "but that would not bring back the dead or heal the wounded. What matters is that future generations understand why the Empire fell and how to prevent its return." Commander Jake Morrison was put in charge of the new Interspecies Defense Force. Its mission was simple: prevent any single species from ever again building an empire based on the EO oppression of others. "We are not the galaxy's police," he told his officers. "We are the galaxy's insurance policy. We exist to make sure that no species ever again faces what humanity faced 2 years ago." 5 years after the end of the war, Captain Amy Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the TCS Horizon, the same ship where Jake Morrison had first learned of the attack on New Eden. But this time, they were not heading to investigate a destroyed colony. They were heading to explore a new star system, accompanied by a crew that included humans, Veltar, reformed Zephyrians, and representatives from 6 other species. "New contacts on sensors," reported the tactical officer, a young Zephyrian named Vex who had joined the Alliance fleet after the war. 3 ships of unknown configuration. Amy smiled. "Standard first contact protocols. Let them know we come in peace." The galaxy had changed. The age of empire was over, replaced by an age of cooperation. Species that had never imagined working together now explored the stars side by side. Worlds that had known only oppression now governed themselves. It had all started because one species had refused to surrender when surrender was the logical choice. Because humans had chosen to fight not just for survival, but for the principle that all intelligent beings deserved freedom. The Zephyrians had chosen war with humanity expecting to face another conquest. Instead, they had faced a reality they could never have imagined. That some wars are not fought to defeat enemies but to transform them into allies. War Prime Kethvar, now serving a life sentence for war crimes, spent his days in a comfortable prison on Earth, writing his memoirs. In them he tried to explain how the mightiest empire in the galaxy had been brought down by a species they had dismissed as weak. "We thought strength meant the ability to destroy," he wrote. "We never understood that true strength is the ability to build. The humans did not defeat us through superior force. They defeated us by showing us a better way to live." The galaxy was at peace, not the peace of the conquered, but the peace of the free. And in the depths of space, new ships carried explorers from dozens of worlds to discover what wonders awaited them among the stars. The war was over. The future had begun,